In the grimy streets of Crimson City, Mike Tyson faces off against the ruthless Venom Syndicate. Outnumbered and outgunned, the former heavyweight champ must use his legendary skills to take down the drug gang and save the town from their brutal reign. Witness the explosive showdown that pits the world's toughest boxer against an army of criminals in a fight for justice and redemption. Grateful to have you here. Which part of the world are you watching from? And please leave your thoughts on the message I want to convey. In the grimy, neon-lit streets of Crimson City, a place where the law often took a back seat to the whims of the criminal underworld, a legend was about to be reborn. Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world, found himself in this den of iniquity, not by choice, but by the cruel twist of fate. He had come to pay his respects to an old friend who had passed away, but little did he know that his presence would ignite a powder keg of violence and retribution. The city was under the iron grip of the notorious drug gang, the Venom Syndicate, led by the ruthless and cunning Victor "Viper" Kane. The syndicate controlled every aspect of the city's illicit trade, from drugs to guns, and their influence extended to the highest echelons of power. The police were either on their payroll or too afraid to stand in their way. The citizens lived in constant fear, their lives dictated by the whims of the syndicate. As Mike Tyson's black SUV rolled into the city, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of neon signs and the occasional echo of a gunshot. Tyson, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, kept a low profile as he navigated the treacherous streets. His destination was a small, rundown diner on the outskirts of the city, a place where his old friend used to work. The diner, aptly named The Last Stop, was a relic of a bygone era. Its faded sign and chipped paint belied the warmth and camaraderie that once existed within its walls. As Tyson pulled into the parking lot, he noticed a group of men loitering outside. They were dressed in leather jackets adorned with the insignia of the Venom Syndicate, their faces etched with the hard lines of a life lived on the edge. At the center of the group stood a hulking figure, his muscles straining against the confines of his jacket. His name was Bruno the Beast Martinez, Victor Kane's right-hand man and enforcer. Bruno was known for his brutal efficiency and unyielding loyalty to the syndicate. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the parking lot as Tyson stepped out of his SUV. Tyson's presence did not go unnoticed. Despite his modest attire, there was an aura of power and danger that radiated from him. The syndicate members, too lost in their own arrogance, mistook Tyson's restrained demeanor for weakness. They saw him merely as an unsuspecting outsider who had stumbled into their territory. Bruno's eyes narrowed as he watched Tyson approach the diner. A smirk played on his lips as he called out, his voice laced with derision. "Well, look at this guy. Thinks he's too good for a bike, huh?" His words were a thinly veiled attempt to draw Tyson into a confrontation. The syndicate members chuckled and jeered in agreement, their bodies tensing like coiled springs, ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. Tyson remained calm and collected, his resolve unshaken by Bruno's taunts. Without so much as a glance at the gang, he walked past them, his stride confident and measured. The gang, their laughter dying on their lips, watched as he headed towards the diner, their collective anger growing at Tyson's apparent disregard for their perceived authority. As Tyson reached the door, he shared a silent, venomous glance with Bruno. A wordless agreement passed between them, their patience fraying as they prepared to make their next move, oblivious to the danger that awaited them. Inside the diner, Tyson maintained his low profile, ordering a burger and quietly slipping into a booth near the window. From his vantage point, he enjoyed an unobstructed view of the busy parking lot, where Bruno and his gang continued to loiter, their bravado still high, despite being outplayed by Tyson's unflappable demeanor. As they surveyed the area, their eyes settled on the unmistakable silhouette of Tyson's black SUV parked in close proximity to their motorcycles. A malicious glint appeared in Bruno's eyes as an idea formed in his mind, promising chaos and retribution. Bruno, his face contorting into a sneer, spoke to his crew, his voice loud and dripping with contempt. "Who does he think he is, parking that fancy car next to our bikes?" His words were laced with jealousy and indignation, rallying his gang members, whose collective anger solidified into a single hostile entity. "We can't have some hotshot coming into our town and thinking he owns the place," Bruno growled, his voice echoing through the parking lot. The simmering rage in the group ignited into a conflagration of malicious intent. The gang members stirred with a newfound purpose, rising to their feet. Among them was a wiry man with slicked back hair and a sinister grin. His name was Carlos the Snake Rodriguez, known for his cunning and ruthlessness. Carlos echoed Bruno's sentiment, his voice a deadly hiss. "Let's teach him some respect." He cracked his knuckles as he moved towards the diner door, his threat raw and visceral, echoing throughout the group. Carlos sauntered into the diner with an arrogant swagger, his eyes locked on Tyson's back as he approached the booth. Leaning against the table, he addressed Tyson with a venomous drawl, his voice laced with enough sarcasm to curdle milk. "Hey, pal, nice car you got there, but you might want to move it before it gets damaged." The implicit threat hung in the air like a toxic mist. Tyson, having heard Carlos's threat, finally turned his attention to the gang member. His gaze hardened as he sized up the new threat. "I'm just here to eat," he replied, his voice low and steady. "Don't start trouble." Tyson's warning, spoken in the clipped tones of a man used to getting his way, underscored the gravity of the situation. His words were laced with a controlled fury that threatened to erupt. Carlos, undeterred, leaned closer, his breath reeking of cheap beer as he attempted to intimidate Tyson further. Carlos, his arrogance bolstered by the implied threat of his gang members waiting outside, reacted to Tyson's warning with mocking contempt. A malicious smile played on his lips as he leaned in closer, the stench of alcohol assaulting Tyson's nostrils. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" Carlos snarled, his voice a deadly hiss. "I was just making a friendly suggestion." The air in the diner grew heavy with tension, the looming violence hanging like a thundercloud over Tyson and Carlos. But before the confrontation could escalate further, a shrill voice cut through the silence, its volume punctuating the simmering anger. The source of the intervention was the waitress, a young woman with a sympathetic expression and a fiercely protective tone. "Hey, leave him alone," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "He's not bothering anyone." Carlos's eyes darkened with a murderous rage, his expression like a coiled snake ready to strike. He jerked away from Tyson, a warning growl rumbling in his throat. For a moment, it seemed as though the volatile gang member might unleash his fury on the waitress, but he restrained himself, shooting her a final withering glare as he turned on his heel. "Mind your own business," he spat, his words edged with menace. With his meal finished, Tyson slowly rose from his booth, his movements deliberate and methodical. He walked towards the exit, his gaze fixed on the gang members lurking just outside. Their presence was like a wall of menace. The moment he stepped out into the open, they converged upon him, the threat implicit in their numbers. The air crackled with tension as the gang closed in on their target, their eyes predatory, gleaming with anticipation. Bruno, flanked by his gang, stepped forward, a self-satisfied smile stretching across his face. His voice was like an oil slick, his words oozing with a malevolent charm. "Leaving so soon?" he drawled, his tone mocking and laced with venom. "We thought you might want to hang out with us for a while. You look like a guy who knows how to have a good time." His expression belied his true intent, the dark glint in his eyes indicating that having a good time was the last thing on his mind. Tyson came to a halt, his movements fluid and controlled as he slipped his hands into his pockets, his stance conveying a deceptive nonchalance. His gaze was steady and piercing, fixed on Bruno. "I don't want any problems," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." The gang, sensing Tyson's determination, exchanged glances, the group dynamic shifting as they struggled to decide their next move. The gang, their confidence bolstered by Bruno's lead, erupted into mocking laughter, the sound sharp and cruel. The laughter was a deadly contagion, spreading throughout the group like wildfire, until the sound threatened to drown out all other noise. Bruno, emboldened by the group's support, took a step closer, his finger jabbing into Tyson's chest. "You're going to regret coming here," he hissed, his breath hot and heavy against Tyson's skin. "We're going to teach you a lesson about respecting the Venom Syndicate." Tyson, stoic in the face of Bruno's assault, remained immobile, his expression unchanging, his body language conveying a quiet defiance. Enraged by this perceived disrespect, Bruno raised his arm and gestured to his crew with a curt nod. The silent command sent a ripple of excitement through the gang as they surged forward, surrounding Tyson like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey, their movements taut with anticipation. "Show him what happens when you mess with us," Bruno growled, his voice brimming with raw rage like a coiled viper. Mike Tyson struck, his movements a blur of expertly executed punches. The gang members, caught off guard by the sudden attack, barely had time to react before Tyson's fists connected with their faces. The impact sent them reeling, the force of the blows echoing throughout the parking lot. The sickening crunch of bones and cartilage added a chilling soundtrack to the violence unfolding. In mere seconds, both men crumpled to the ground, unconscious and bleeding, their bodies contorted at unnatural angles. The remaining gang members stared at the crumpled forms of their comrades, their mouths agape in shock. For a moment, there was silence, a fleeting pause before the rage surged through their veins, overwhelming any lingering fear or hesitation. Bruno, his eyes burning with hatred, reached behind him and withdrew a heavy chain from his back pocket, the links glinting malevolently in the dying sunlight. His movement prompted another member to brandish a baseball bat, the weapon held high, his fingers clenched tightly around the handle. As the gang encircled Tyson, closing in like a tightening noose, Bruno's lips curled into a cruel smile, the chain dangling from his fist like a serpent. His words carried the weight of his murderous intent, ringing out clear and cold in the tense silence. "Big mistake, tough guy," he snarled, his tone dripping with contempt. The words hung heavy in the air, underlining the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of which had become all too apparent to Tyson. Tyson, now in his element, cracked his knuckles, the sound a stark warning of the destruction he was capable of unleashing. His demeanor shifted, the calmness transforming into a steely intensity, the predatory gaze of a fighter ready to unleash hell upon his enemies. "You really don't want to do this," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each syllable punctuated by a palpable rage simmering beneath the surface. The words were a final, desperate attempt to dissuade the gang from their path of violence. But they fell on deaf ears, their thirst for revenge clouding their judgment. The gang, howling with savage fury, descended upon Tyson in a frenzy of punches, kicks, and swinging chains, like a force of nature unleashed. Tyson became a blur of motion, weaving and ducking around the attacks, his own punches and kicks landing with earth-shattering force. The carnage that ensued was a symphony of violence, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, and the grunts of pain that followed filling the air, like the howls of demons unleashed from the depths of hell. The camera, now in slow motion, lingered on Tyson's grace and precision, his movements a masterclass in raw power and technique. Each punch was a work of art, every step a ballet of destruction, as he moved through the onslaught with a predatory grace, his reactions lightning fast as he parried attacks and unleashed his own devastating counterstrikes. The ferocity of the battle was matched only by the control and poise Tyson displayed, the product of years of training and a storied career in the ring. Bruno, his face a mask of rage and bruises, staggered backward, staggering under the onslaught of Tyson's unrelenting assault. His eyes, wild and feral, darted from side to side as he tried to regain his footing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. In a desperate bid to turn the tide, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a switchblade, flicking it open with a snap. The blade glinted menacingly in the fading light, a deadly promise in Bruno's hand. "Let's see how tough you are now," Bruno bellowed, his words choked with anger and desperation. As Tyson heard Bruno's challenge, a steely glint flashed in his eyes, the expression on his face hardening into a mask of pure determination. Without hesitation, he advanced towards the gang leader, his steps measured and calculated, his movements those of a predator closing in for the kill. Bruno's desperate lunge was met with a blur of motion as Mike sidestepped the attack deftly, twisting Bruno's arm and forcing him to release the knife, which clattered to the ground. Tyson's brutal efficiency was a stark contrast to Bruno's reckless fury. He pinned the gang leader to the ground, his knee pressed firmly into Bruno's chest. The tables had turned, the roles of predator and prey, now reversed. Tyson's voice, dripping with cold authority, echoed through the parking lot. "You don't mess with people for no reason," he said, his eyes narrowing into flinty slits. In the aftermath of the brutal exchange, the once fierce gang members were scattered across the parking lot like broken toys, their defeated forms a testament to the raw power and skill of Mike Tyson. The onlookers gathered at the windows erupted into cheers, their admiration and gratitude for the legendary fighter palpable in the air. Tyson, his fists still clenched, regarded the scene with a measured gaze, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, slowly dissipating as the danger receded. With a slow, deliberate movement, he dusted himself off, his attention shifting to the battered men lying on the asphalt. As the chaos subsided, a siren wailed in the distance, the high-pitched cry heralding the arrival of the local sheriff. Pulling into the parking lot, the lawman's cruiser screeched to a halt, its headlights casting stark beams across the carnage of the skirmish. Climbing out of the vehicle, the sheriff surveyed the scene before him, taking in the beaten gang members and the triumphant figure of Tyson with a seasoned eye. A knowing grin spread across his face as he approached the legendary boxer, chuckling softly under his breath. Tyson, still drenched in the thrill of victory, met the sheriff's grin with a smile of his own, a gesture that transformed his hardened features into something almost boyish. "Just teaching them a little manners," he quipped, the dry wit adding a touch of levity to the aftermath of the encounter. The two men shook hands, a bond of mutual respect between seasoned warriors who had seen the worst humanity had to offer. As the battered and bloodied gang members were hauled to their feet, the sheriff's deputies moved in to restrain them, handcuffs snapping shut around their wrists. Their protests fell on deaf ears as they were loaded into the back of the police cruiser, their cries of outrage muted by the closing of the doors. As the cruiser sped off into the night, its siren fading into the distance, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The reign of terror imposed by the Venom Syndicate was finally brought to an end, their menace quashed by the indomitable spirit and righteous fist of Mike Tyson. As Mike climbed into his black SUV, the onlookers, now freed from their fear, erupted into a chorus of applause, a spontaneous ovation for the hero who, in a single act of selfless bravery, had restored order and justice to their town. The resounding cheers followed Mike as he pulled out of the parking lot, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he drove off into the night. As the night deepened and the adrenaline subsided, Mike Tyson found himself driving into the darkness, the highway stretching endlessly before him. But his mind was still racing, the recent events playing back like a reel in his head. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing amidst the chaos, a lone figure standing tall against a tide of violence. As the memories flickered across his consciousness, his voice echoed in a low, contemplative murmur, his words a culmination of years of experience, a truth forged in the fires of his legendary career. Sometimes, you gotta stand up for what's right, even if it means standing alone, he murmured, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The words hung in the air, a testament to the unyielding spirit of a man who had faced the darkest depths of humanity and emerged victorious, a beacon of hope and justice in a world often shrouded in darkness. And so, Mike Tyson drove on, his journey a testament to the indomitable spirit that had defined his life and career. The legend of Iron Mike lived on, a symbol of strength, courage, and unyielding determination in the face of adversity. The city of Crimson City, once a den of iniquity and fear, now stood as a testament to the power of one man's resolve to stand against the darkness and bring light to those who needed it most. In today's world, standing up for what's right often means facing adversity and even standing alone. Mike Tyson's encounter with the Venom Syndicate teaches us that true strength lies not just in physical prowess, but in the courage to confront injustice. Like Tyson, we must be willing to challenge the status quo and defend those who cannot defend themselves. His actions remind us that one person can make a difference, inspiring others to find their own courage. So, stand tall, speak up, and be a beacon of hope and justice in your community. Your actions can ripple out, creating a better world for all.
If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe Undercover Insights channel.